And they have somehow figured out a way to stay at a healthy weight and to not get heart disease. And it's because they're eating real food that meets the needs of their cells. And so I think to just boil that down, the root cause of the problem is that we have a toxic food supply that's no longer filled with the molecular information that our body needs to know to be satiated and to function properly. And so through the complex biology of satiety hormones and neurobiology and microbiome function, we are driven to eat so much more. So truly, the jumping off point for anyone on the quest to better health is to eat as much real, unprocessed food from good soil as possible, and of any dietary philosophy they want. Truly, I think if someone's eating real, unprocessed food from good soil who is, plant-based or who is keto, they are going to have such a higher chance of meeting their body's actual fundamental needs. And the good thing about biomarker testing is they can track for themselves if they are having good cellular function with that strategy. There's been studies that have panned this out. We know that the more ultra-processed food you eat, the higher risk of obviously obesity, but also chronic diseases are. But then, of course, there's an amazing study from Kevin Hall just recently where he basically locked people up at the NIH, and for 2 weeks he had them eat ultra-processed food, and for 2 weeks he had them eat real food. And people ate 7,000 more calories in the 2-week period when they were eating ultra-processed food versus the unprocessed food.
They were locked at the NIH?
I mean,
I've been to NIH quite a bit. It's great for a day job or a day visit. I don't know that I want to be locked there. That sounds like the Stanford prisoner experiment.
I say this tongue in cheek and with such admiration for what he had to do, but I think it's so amusing that, we have this totally frankenfood, toxic food system that's largely ultra processed. And it took amazing Kevin Hall to basically do an NIH, funded study where people, what I say by locked is that they were inpatients at the NIH and had ad lib, unlimited access to food during each of those 2-week interventions. So it was 2 weeks of ultra processed food, 2 weeks of unprocessed or minimally processed food. And they could eat whatever they wanted, as much as they wanted in both groups. And then they would weigh every single bite that was left on their trays. So they knew exactly how many calories they ate. And literally just giving people this ultra-processed food, which is devoid of what our bodies need and therefore will drive people to eat more. They ate 500 calories more per day for a total of 7,000 calories more in that 2 weeks. And they gained about 2 pounds and then lost 2 pounds in the unprocessed group, which makes sense, of course, because a pound is about 3,500 calories. And so we have to do these kind of crazy studies just to prove what we kind of know is true, which is that this ultra-processed food environment that's cropped up for the past 50 years is an experiment that has failed. It has failed. Close to 45% of kids are overweight or obese now. It's not working. And that really is the root cause. So I think a lot of food is about quality and how do we actually really meet the needs of the cells so that our satiety hormones get secreted and we naturally stop eating. Because just telling people eat less calories but eat whatever you want, that just doesn't work. We have to inspire the body to not want to eat excess calories, which we do by stimulating satiety hormones, helping the microbiome support that process and then change our reward circuitry, which is done with the most nutrient-rich food we can possibly get. And that's why I mentioned the soil, because our food is drastically depleted of nutrients. So when we look at that 70 metric tons of food we're eating in the lifetime, it's just fascinating. That's the information for our body, what it's going to be built from, how it's going to function. Well, right now, 60 to 75% is ultra processed. So we slash the value because the ultra processing just slashes the nutrients. We slash the value of that 70 metric tons. And then we have crappy soil because our industrial agriculture system, which means the food in some cases has 70% less of key micronutrients in it. So that 70 metric tons, what's actually useful for our body becomes so much smaller. So what we want to do is basically expand the value of that substrate we're putting in the body. And that means real food, unprocessed, from good soil, meet the needs of the cells, naturally don't be hungry, maintain a healthy weight. And, something I talk about is that we could talk about nutrition, the biochemistry of nutrition all day, but in my review of sort of the biology and the biochemistry, like there's 5 main things I think we can strive for in our food that can really help meet the needs of our cells. And when it really comes, there are obviously more things our body needs, but if we strive for these 5 things, we will ultimately, I think, eat a really healthy diet. And that is fiber, omega-3s, adequate healthy protein, a good amount of probiotics, and high antioxidant sources. And if we build our diet around knowing a few things in each of those categories that we really love and stock our kitchen with it and make our meals a mixing and matching of each of those components, and we get a good amount of those, we will give the body a lot of what it needs to have mitochondrial health, reduce chronic inflammation, reduce oxidative stress.
It's interesting for me to take a step back from nutrition as it's typically presented and think about the brain, the hypothalamic circuitry that drives hunger and satiety and things like that. And to map that onto what I've heard, and I believe to be true based on my view of the literature, which is that we are largely, meaning these circuits in the brain make us largely amino acid foraging machines because we need those amino acids in order to carry out metabolic processes and reconstruct any tissues that need repair and recovery. Not just from exercise, but just daily turnover, removal of waste, et cetera. So we're foraging for amino acids unconsciously. We're foraging for micronutrients. And of course, we need macronutrients. We need enough energy from proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, or some either combination of the 3. I feel like I'm sort of in the dying category of omnivores, right? I'm neither, I'm not meat-based and I'm not plant-based. I'm in omnivores. I think most people are omnivores, actually, but omnivores aren't discussed quite as much as the other categories, at least not on social media. But that we think of ourselves as getting hungry and wanting to eat, and I think eating the foods, some of them that I listed off before, like meat and fish and eggs and vegetables and fruits, and some I do like starches like rice, oatmeal, some pastas, some sourdough breads and things. I love butter. Who doesn't love butter? Of course, none of that stuff in excess, olive oil. But if one looks at kind of that buffet of options, you realize you can get some high quality amino acids. You can get some high quality lipids. You probably want to get more of them from olive oil than from butter, but you can get the micronutrients you need provided those food sources are healthy. Now, contrast that with a highly processed diet or even a minimally processed diet, and you can get the taste, you can get the macronutrients, you can get the calories, but you don't, meaning the brain doesn't really have a sense of, it can't directly map taste, calories, micronutrients onto one another. Yeah. And so you can imagine that the neural circuits, and here there's a little bit of hypothesizing / conjecture, but that the neural circuits responsible for hunger and satiety would get immensely confused by what's in a highly processed food, right? A Snickers bar, if you like sweets, tastes pretty good, but it's unclear what's in it except sugar, except some, it's got a certain Snickers bar taste, right? But if the circuits of the brain are really trying to drive us to get amino acids and micronutrients for bodily health and repair, well, then highly processed and even moderately processed food has just got to be pure confusion. Sorry to go long here, but it reminds me of an idea I had once where, like, imagine if you took a pill that greatly increased the level of dopamine, norepinephrine, acetylcholine, and serotonin all at once. That's polypharmacology. And it might make you feel a certain way, maybe good, maybe bad, and then afterwards you'd probably have a bit of a crash as the drug wore off. No doubt you would. But let's say you wanted more of that feeling. You wouldn't really know what to go look for because you don't know what was in it because it's polypharmacology. So I feel like highly processed food is polypharmacology. Yes. Whereas when you are eating foods that create a more pure experience of micronutrients, amino acid content, calories, and taste, those 4 things map to one another, that intuitively we can start to understand, oh, I like this food and it's good for me.